Hi guys, welcome to March and our Snowy Trees workshop. So I wanted to try something out a little bit different. Basically, I've recorded the whole workshop ahead of time on silent mode, and then I'm going to sit and sort of watch it with you and narrate just so that I can avoid some of the awkward gaps and maybe just shorten the workshop and make it a little more effective. I feel like a lot of the time I'm just talking to sort of fill dead space, and maybe it's not the best use of your time. So without further ado, here we go. The reference photo is attached for you. I'd like to say use it loosely, make it a little bit your own, but basically you're gonna start. I used a smaller sheet of paper for this because I wanted to make it nice and simple. So the sheet of paper is probably 4 by 6 inches. I've gone ahead, made a border on the sheet, and then really what I start with drawing on the trees are kind of the outlines of like the bubbles. So, rather than getting the individual tree branches, they're these really fun shapes because they're kind of already clumped together with snow. So I'm just drawing those through nice and slowly. So I've kind of got one tree as the main focal point, and then I'm just having a little bit of fun with smaller shapes in the background. So I don't know, to make something visually appealing, I think they actually do say do an odd number of objects, whether it's 3, 5, or 7. I've totally broken that rule. I did 4 in mine. But really what you can see, and again, I apologize, the pencil is always a little bit too light, but I'm just sort of getting the outline of the top branches of the trees and then sort of just building in those clumps of snow, just in sort of a gentle shape, but it just makes for kind of a bit of a fun thing overall. So once those shapes are drawn, we're just showing it up as a nice close-up. This is probably funny with me overlapping. Yeah, once those shapes are drawn, I'll show you a nice little close-up here, but you can just get a nice idea of sort of this general like bubbly shape of snow. So the next thing we're gonna do, as always, just mix our watercolor in our palette. With anything, you just wanna make sure that you've got your color mixed first. That way you're not worrying about running into dry spots when you're busy building your painting. So for this one, what I've done is a mix of lavender and cerulean. And then I kind of had a bit of play with natural pinks and purples. I had a really beautiful sunrise picture to draw from that is in your reference photo attached to this Patreon lesson. Once your paint is mixed, we're gonna go ahead, we've talked about this many a time, but we're gonna do a nice wet in wet approach. So I'm just using one of my classic round brushes. It's nice and clean to start. First thing I wanna do is just get it nice and damp in my water. And then I wanna have my water or my paper towel on hand so that I can dry it off and blot it. Okay, so you can see I'm absorbing most of the water from the brush into the paper, but it'll still leave a nice, just almost like a dry wet wash, if that makes sense, on the branches. So I'm just gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna color in a few of the branches at a time. And then the trick with snow, you can see that I'm coloring the branch or the area where the snow will go in entirely. But when it comes to laying the color down, I'm actually laying it down kind of closer to the bottom of the branch. So I'm trying to imagine the visual weight of the snow. So if the light was hitting it, it would reflect really white on top, but the color, the shadow, is gonna hit on the lower extremities, if that makes sense. So you can kind of see it in the painting right now. I'm just sort of building up. So I'm leaving my white spots. I'm going in with my second wash right now, working fairly quickly. You know, wet and wet, you want to be pretty confident with this. But yeah, starting with a wash of watercolor and then again, just sort of tracing the shape of the snow, but I'm concentrating the color towards kind of the way gravity would hit or light would hit. So I'm leaving kind of the top portion of it on the left-hand side a little bit lighter. All right, so you can see I'm just gonna kind of repeat this process, get through that first tree. This one's kind of got a bluish purple feel to it. The sky had a really nice color to it. It kind of had like some pink overtones and purple. Kind of gives you a feeling that this is maybe like in the north, it's like Alaska, maybe the Northern Lights, or maybe it's just a really beautiful sunrise. Totally up to you. I love what your brain can fill in when given just minor information and imagination. All right, so we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna move into some of those background trees now. So same thing, color pattern is still similar. So again, I've just traced the outline of the wet branches. As soon as I've got that first layer of clean water down, I can go in, pick up my wash with my brush. You can even see from my palette, it's starting to get a little bit dry. But I'm just quickly before the paper can dry, going ahead, tracing around the outside of the branch. So once again, my emphasis here is really on shadow. So, you know, snow is white, so it's easy to be like, oh, it doesn't have any color. It does have color, it's just that cast by the shadows. Sometimes I'll commonly mix yellow and purple, so I'll do yellow on the top component and purple on the bottom. This one, it was just sort of a dawn. There wasn't really an obvious amount of sunlight, so we went with kind of a white, left the white, and then just put sort of a combination of purple and blue at the bottom of those branches. Okay, so once my branches are done, I've kind of filled them in. I'm gonna let them dry. I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put in my ground wash. So I've switched over to one of my flat brushes. This is my 3/4 inch. I'm just doing a nice even wash of water on the paper, clean water, and then I'm going back in, I'm picking up my blue and my purple. I've probably mixed just a little bit more, and I'm going to start to lay it in at the base of the trees. So if it was a little bit brighter in the day, I could make a little more of an indication of a shadow of the trees, maybe the light coming from behind. but right now I'm sort of just playing with it. You'll see the reference photo, it's fairly flat. It's kind of a reflection of the sky on the snow, not so much the shadow of the trees. But you can just have a little bit of fun laying in color. And this is again where I like to say it's your artistic license and whatever you want to do with the paper. Just holding that up for you to see. It's pretty pale right now. There's not a lot of contrast going on. This will actually probably be a painting where we don't put any ink on in the final version. We're just going to rely on the beauty of the watercolor. So I'm ready to start mixing into my sky now. I'm going to go ahead, re-wet my palette. The sky, you'll see it in the reference photo, it had some really beautiful kind of pinks, a little bit of purple and blue. So I'm just getting that mixed in the palette right now, kind of playing with my colors, making sure I've got a good stock of color. That lavender certainly carries me far. I'm going to mix a little bit of lavender in the blue palette, I suspect, as well. All right, and as always, once I've got my colors pre-mixed, I'm going to go back in with my flat brush and I'm going to get that layer of clean water laid down on my paper as quickly and efficiently as possible. So I'm going to have best luck getting a continuous wash as long as that paper is slightly damp in a consistent pattern before I start laying in my color. I did run into a little bit of bubbling with the sky on this one, just the page was drying. I hadn't mixed my color as well as I thought. So here we go. Kind of started this one in an odd spot as well. So I started with the pinks in the middle. A little more classic of me should have been to actually start at the base of this with the purple. But to be honest, I was kind of having fun. It was just a day I was really in flow, working as quickly as possible. I was on a little bit of a time limit, I confess. But the end result is not bad. You can see that purple and pink were still blending nicely on the page. I think the bubbling occurred when I went back in for a second layer, and then when I tried to get into that little gap right here. So you can already see once I started adding the blue in, it was starting to dry just a little bit on the page. Like I said, did not handle this sky in the best manner, but it's okay, right? Art is about making messy. It's about having fun with your style. So I kind of went with a uniform wash across the page to sort of preserve it. But you can see the bubbling was starting to happen just a little bit where the pink meets purple. It wasn't too obvious in the final piece, and this is for learning, so I still think it's beautiful. All right, so at this point I can kind of show that close-up sheen. It's looking pretty good, but now what we want to do is add in a little bit of depth. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm going to mix in my green, and I'm gonna start just adding in what you can see of the branches on the trees. It's not a lot. All right, so when it comes to my April content for Patreon, we're going to actually be focusing on florals, just giving you a sneak peek. But one of the biggest mistakes I ever made with watercolor was in not mixing my greens. So I'll be sharing that next month. But in order to get a nice woodsy green, you really need to ground that. That bright green that they give you, it's probably in your palette too. It's a Viridian hue. It's very, very bright. So it needs to be grounded. I tend to do that by adding in a mix of browns, but I've also found adding indigo, which is a very grayish blue, really helps with that. So once I've got that mixed, I'm going to my 1/4 inch angle shader. Same thing as always, getting the brush wet, blotting out most of the water so that I can really just pick up the paint and pigment. And now we're just gonna have fun, start laying that in. So I'm sort of just, you know, filling in the gaps basically, wherever there's little white spaces and little gaps between the snow covered spots. That's where I'm gonna stick in the fur of my fir trees. Okay, so you can see we're getting a little bit further with the green. I'm just building up a few more layers now. So that was always sort of a pretty dry wash. So it was kind of a wet wash going onto dry paper, but not a very wet wash at the start. So it's really easy to build up color and make it a little more distinct, just a little bit richer in tone and kind of draw the eye. So, really with this, it could have felt like a very shapeless drawing, but we do really get that quick impression that this is like snow-covered trees on a winter morning. Um, really very quickly. This is a 20-minute class, so. All right, and just on the tail end, I'm just adding in a little bit more blue at the base of the trees, just to sort of pump up those shadows. I didn't do a wash of wet first, which honestly I think it would have helped me. It would have made it look a little more natural. But again, this is always a learning process, so I hope you enjoyed.